attending tonight's Town of Ossining Planning Board meeting, Wednesday, May 6, 2015. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think we're good now. No? Yep.
That's good.
Okay, we're going to begin now with the first item on our agenda, Highview Farm, Morningside Drive. We are in the process of reviewing our scoping document. So this is our public scoping session. This is our second draft. I will ask David Stoneman to do a brief summary of the changes.
Shall I walk through all the changes?
Just to give us a general summary.
Well, basically, whatever was said at the last scoping session, as well as whatever comments came in by document, email, or what have you, are included in here. I could walk through, but basically there are a whole series of additional things that would be studied, including specifying the kinds of conventional layouts that we'd want to see, or I'm sorry, the number of lots in the conventional layouts we'd want to see, and we mirrored the cluster layouts. We had specified sizes of cluster layouts, or number of lots in cluster layouts. Now the conventional layouts mirror that. And I'd be happy to, without going through these item by item, it's hard to summarize what has been included, but there are many additional things that have been included. And I can go through them item by item or answer questions.
Well, I obviously couldn't go through and make sure that, obviously can't. I wasn't able to actually go through and compare because I didn't have the transcript of the record. David had it, so. But certainly a lot was added to it, and beyond that, I really can't say any more.
All the changes, you can say all the changes are shown with like that, so it's very clear what's been added.
Okay. All the changes have been shown as double-lined. Any of the members have any comments on the new document as presented? No? No?
Need to read it.
No?
I have read it, and it looks complete and in good order. I'm happy with it.
Dan, do you have any comments on the new draft as presented tonight?
The only comment, I guess, is the one requirement that was an addition relating. The only comment I had was regarding the stormwater section, and that was in regard to the phosphorus loading study that the DEP used to require. The New York State regulations contemplate nutrient removal in their design guidelines, and looking at phosphorus in particular, or any type of nutrient loading, is all sort of factored into their design guidelines for the water quality volume. So I don't know if that's really necessary, in that I don't know it's really a meaningful exercise. I mean, certainly the other parts of it, if you want to address, potential impacts, being theoretical impacts from fertilizers and so forth, that certainly is appropriate, but there's really sort of no empirical way to analyze the phosphorus.
If I can add just a little something to that. I've been involved with water quality studies for some time, and I find that doing an initial phosphorus and nitrogen analysis gives you a baseline to compare later runoff values to. It's a simple set of tests and inexpensive, actually. So if it pleases the chair, I would like to continue to see that as a requirement. Just an initial water quality baseline study with phosphorus, nitrogen, nitrate, and ammonia, which is pretty basic.
I guess my follow-up is to that, I mean, this is a typical residential development is all throughout town. The type of analyses you're talking about, is frequently done on large-scale water quality modeling and things like that. In our case, what we need to do is we need to design these practices based upon, the standards that have been applied throughout, that are, the New York State DEC has come up with, which really, I think in a very sensible way, size the stormwater practices to address that. And I understand what you're saying, but the question then becomes, if you have the baseline, then what's the follow-up? That if you take a sample, you're going to take a sample after the development is built or ongoing. I mean, there really is no program on follow-up of stormwater practices. But I mean, certainly they could do it. I just don't know what you do with the information.
Thank you.
This just says phosphorus, so you suggesting we add other?
Actually, yeah, I mentioned last time.
He said this just says phosphorus.
Right. It does just say phosphorus, and I think that's probably the most important of the nutrients to test, so I didn't bring it up specifically again. But typically when water quality studies are done, they'll probably run a sort of a standard panel, which would normally include nitrates and nitrites as well as free ammonia. So it's probably going to be in there if you ask them to do, or if the applicant asks a contractor to do that analysis, it'll probably be automatically included. But I didn't want to insist that all of those go in. So just leave it as it is with phosphorus. I think it's all right.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any department heads or chairs of the town of Ossining who would like to speak on the second draft of the scoping document?
I'm acting chair and Leslie Elks absence.
Can you use the mic? Yes.
Hello? Is it on?
No.
Iron toward the top.
First of all, I would like to thank everybody for their work on this. I think it's an amazing document. I think you did a really good job putting all the comments in, particularly how you organized it. I think I'm so impressed. I'm really, really pleased with this. I think it's good for the town because the environment is something that has been ignored for a long time, and now we are paying the price for that, and I think we're taking a step forward that will make things better for those that come after us, so I'm really pleased with that. I do have a couple questions, and maybe it's in here, but I did mention tributaries that are not listed on the watershed map, but they exist. There's a waterfall on Morningside Drive in the town of Newcastle, just I guess north of the where the property is for this Highview Farms. My question is, how will we know how that will be impacted? So I had mentioned with the connectivity and all that to figure out all the tributaries that are coming from that property. So I don't know if that's in here because it says on page 6, C1, you mentioned a complete study of surface water quality, impacts on receiving wetlands, streams, and ponds, so maybe it's part of that. And on,
Before you go on, Dan, do you want to address it?
Sure.
When the stormwater study is done, the watersheds that are impacted by the development have to be studied for the, the antecedent pre-development condition as well as the post-condition. That being said, I think that waterfall actually comes off the farm. I think it's in areas that are not impacted, but either way it will shake out in that the applicant will be required to prepare watershed maps and quantify runoff volumes from each of these areas. So if it's affected, it will be analyzed.
okay. And then there happens to be a little stream behind my property that's also not on that watershed map, and it's unclear, but it definitely comes from that property somewhere, but it's not on. So there's two things I know of living there that are not on that watershed map. So how does that factor in when it's not on the map?
Well, the analysis that the applicant's going to be required to do requires him to, again, look at the pre and post conditions, and his obligation is to size practices, first off, that meet the criteria for treating nutrients that the DEC has come up with in terms of sizing these practices, but also to demonstrate that the post-development runoff generated by the site is at or less than the pre-development levels. So, generally speaking, that analysis generally stays within the property and maybe some of the surrounding areas to verify that at particular points where, say, confluence of different watersheds come together, that he's able to hold to the pre-development levels.
Right. So
But we don't chase it down indefinitely downstream. But it's his
Yes.
obligation to demonstrate that in a sensible place to analyze all of his watersheds, if they do converge somewhere off-site, to analyze at that point. So until we actually see the initial analysis, it's hard to say. But I think what you're asking is going to be addressed.
Okay, so it's also from the point of that if water is being stored in these tanks that are, or storage tanks or whatever, that there wouldn't be would we be able to anticipate if less water is going to go to those tributaries? Is that part of what you were talking about? Not just runoff of fertilizers and stuff, but also that the water amounts will stay the same for those tributaries. Is there a way on this study to do that?
I mean, there's generally speaking, because of the nature of what they're doing, which is changing the ground cover.
Right.
By virtue of changing the ground cover, there'll be the total volume of runoff will increase. In other words, if the water isn't percolating
Right,
into the
it's not going
ground
right.
as a result of the impervious surfaces, then it's going to run off. So generally speaking, the volume of water over a storm event will be a larger volume, but at the rate at which it leaves the site has to be low enough to ensure that it is lower than or equal to pre-development levels.
Right,
But there will be more, it should be more water.
But it just doesn't tell us if it's going to change how those tributaries are receiving the water now.
But the rate won't be
Am I-
so low that and the basins won't be oversized to the extent that the rate will be so low it would adversely affect the tributaries.
Okay, that's what I'm asking, yeah.
No. I mean,
Okay.
and as I say, the way these basins go, you can figure like it'd be one thing if it was a real prolonged situation, but for most storms, the water is going to drain out in the course of 24 hours.
Right.
So that it isn't like things are just going to, isn't like building a reservoir and everything's going to dry up. That
Right.
it continually empties itself, so there'll always be a flow of water.
Okay,
They're detention basins, not retention basins.
That's right. Yes.
okay. All right, that was my comments, and again, I would like to thank everyone, and David, and your liaison to the environmental group, Gareth, for all of your work on this, and for considering our comments. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to hear from the applicant.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Good evening.
Adam Wexstein from Hockerman, Tortorella, and Wexstein. I'm here on behalf of the applicants. I have given you a letter that was submitted earlier today. I received the draft scope first thing this morning and submitted a letter commenting on some of the remaining issues we have. I'd like to reiterate all the comments without actually physically reiterating them that we made at last week's session and in our letter of April 29. In today's letter, I think the biggest overriding concern and our biggest overriding objection to this scope is the number of alternatives. There are literally 16 alternatives in this scope right now. So for every 2 lots, there's more than one alternative that's being requested to be studied. The whole point of the alternatives, again, is to give you and the public a reasonable basis to make decisions, to decide what are appropriate mitigation measures, to decide what are acceptable environmental impacts in light of the social and economic considerations. When you have a range between 10 lots in your document and 24 lots in your document, doing them each in cluster and conventional, I think that's clearly contrary to what SECRA intends. And the case law says, number one, you don't have to put in every conceivable alternative. Number two, you've got to take into account the applicant's objectives. Clearly the applicant's objectives, 10 and 12 and even 15 make no sense whatsoever. And number three, and perhaps more importantly, when you have that range of values, SECRA really, I believe, encourages you to pick a couple of them because you can extrapolate from them. Every alternative we have, the applicants are going to have to spend money, to spend time analyzing you, giving you enough empirical information so you can make that comparison, meaningful comparison between what's proposed and what the alternatives are. I would submit it doesn't help you and it only hurts the applicant. It's going to make a fatter document, it's going to cost more money, but it's not going to improve your decision making. And again, if you look at the law that I've cited for you, the courts do talk about that you don't have to, you don't have to choose every alternative, particularly when they're along a continuum, such as in this case with density. So it again asks you to narrow the scope of the alternatives. We also still believe the alternative with access through Newcastle is beyond the purview of what you should be doing under SECRA. We believe the alternative, and this is set forth in the letter, of the public wooden walkway through the property is way beyond the scope of what you can ask for under SECRA. Supreme Court case law is 100% clear that in this kind of situation you can't impose a development condition which would create a public pathway or public walkway as a condition to approval with very narrow exceptions. And those exceptions would really be, number one, you can impose it if it serves the exact same purpose as denial of development. Denial of this development isn't getting us any more public access. Or number two, if the impacts of this development are so closely aligned to requiring more public access in another pathway that it's necessary. And those cases are Nolan and Tolan, and I think if you were to consult with Wayne in executive session, he would confirm what I'm telling you. That law is pretty clear. There's no room for wiggle room, and we're certainly not volunteering to do that alternative. The final minor thing I would like to, well, it's not so minor, but the final particular item I'd like to comment on is in Chapter 3, Item A3. And it's a mitigation sentence about wetland disturbance, and there's one sentence in that chapter, it's in that paragraph, well, that's about halfway down. It begins with the word mitigation measures, or the words, mitigation measures will ensure a zero influx of road and lawn chemical runoff into wetland and upland areas and all habitats. That sentence should quite frankly come out. Number one, because as written, the way it's written, if I were to dump some fertilizer or pesticide on my lawn, I am putting it into a habitat, into an upland area. That's not a meaningful standard. The question is to prevent those chemicals from reaching sensitive areas on the site. The way it's written, that's not what it says. And number two, at this point in the process, the board isn't supposed to be making the decision as to what impacts are and are not acceptable. You're supposed to be telling us what to study, what's important. You've already decided here that there can be no such impacts. And quite frankly, that's not the way SECRA works. At the end of the day, SECRA does allow for various impacts, but you're the ones, as the jury, as we discussed last week, who will determine whether whatever impacts are left after we do all the mitigation we can are acceptable in light of the social, economic, and other considerations that SECRA requires you to balance. So I would request again that sentence be removed from that. My other comments were in last week's letter and this week's letter, and I thank you again for your courtesy.
Now we will have members of the public who would like to speak. May you come up to the front, say your name and address, please.
Hi, I want to say hi to my new neighbors. I just moved to, Mary Jean Kavanaugh Cristella, 28 Tavana Road. Wayne is my old neighbor at Kelly Court. We built a house there at Kelly Court 13 years ago, but there was one neighborhood that I always loved, and that was Tavana Road. And the reason I love Tavana Road is because it is historic, and it probably is the one street in all of Westchester, maybe Putnam County, that has mid-century design like no other. I buy homes, I flip homes, so I'm a builder in a sense. This house, though, we're going to live in for a bit longer. I'm going to stay in Ossining long after my kids move on, go to college. But there are a few things that I noticed, and I've only been there 2 months. The traffic at Tavana 133 is horrendous. I've almost gotten hit by my car with other vehicles at least half a dozen times. So as far as traffic goes, to open that road up to the other end is going to be a nightmare. In addition to that, it is an upscale neighborhood. Some of these houses can sell upwards of $800,000. If you're building a new neighborhood behind us, it should be a high-end neighborhood. It shouldn't be a neighborhood that is going for homes under the price of $650,000. This neighborhood is one of the most upscale and historically significant in all of Ossining, and arguably all of Westchester and Putnam. So at the very least, if you're building homes, and one is going to be right behind my property, I mean, I think mine and my neighbor next to me, it's right there. We're planting big trees, so I assume it's going to be built, but I want it to be a house that will maintain or increase the value of our homes. And I think all of us here feel the same way. The last thing I need is a home going in for $400,000 to $550,000. That's going to bring the value of my home down. So it's saying that I'm a fighter. I like what I like. I don't like what I don't like. Traffic's a nightmare. It's really going to disturb all the beautiful landscape and wildlife that's there. I don't want a house right up against my house. I think there should be some other option. And it should be an upscale neighborhood. And I want to say, hi neighbors, I'm going to have an open house and have you all over. Thank you.
At this point, you can mention that. At this point, I would ask that all members of the public make their comments as it relates to the document tonight. And this is just the first step in the process, and the review and analysis happens when we are reviewing the DEIS, etc. So I would ask that all members of the public make comments as it relates to this document that we have in front of us tonight.
Wendy Masterman, 10 Morningside Court, Ossining. I want to begin by saying how pleased I am that much of the EAC's responses to the first draft were included in this second draft. Following last week's planning board meeting, I gave a great deal of thought to the comments made by Bill Janicki regarding the terms in the DEIS scoping outline that he labeled as troublesome. He referenced the terms shall or should be discussed, which appeared 10 times, and as necessary or feasible, appearing 7 times with no further steps mentioned. The new draft also includes many of these terms. For example, on page 6 it reads, where reasonable and possible, as necessary, and the biggest issues to this project will be thoroughly and adequately addressed. I asked at the last meeting how this would be addressed. On page 3 of the EAC report, they requested a runoff study, watershed history study, and water quality study. The runoff was asked to be down to North State Road, which includes Morningside Drive, where the waterfall is, and as we all know, can run very, very, very strongly and then end up flooding on North State Road. I don't see that included. It doesn't mention North State Road at all. And as I said, I have a business down there. It seems that these studies might be addressed by some of the, might address some of these issues and should be included in the second draft. At last week's meeting, I also requested the inclusion of how stormwater from impervious surfaces, including exposed rock, will be directed and controlled during the construction phase and after construction is complete. In addition, document how post-development pollutant loading would be addressed. Post-development areas should include a best estimate of impervious surfaces from building rooftops, roadways, parking lots, driveways, and sidewalks. I also requested that PERC tests be included on all adjoining properties. That is not in this scope. It was also requested that deep hole tests be conducted every 50 feet on center of proposed roads to verify rock to excavate and determine that roads can support the traffic, including heavy equipment for construction and fire emergency vehicles. The road that is planned at the end of Morningside Court to go up a 30-foot slope is a swamp. I'm concerned about that roadway. The other issue that was not addressed is the fiscal impact section, is although taxes will be generated, the construction of 2-bedroom homes adjacent to 4-bedroom homes will cause a reduction in the value of these existing homes and could cause a reduction in our taxes. So what's going to be the benefit here? There are going to be taxes there, and we're going to question our taxes, because we shouldn't be putting 2-bedroom homes behind these beautiful 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom homes.
That's right.
And also, this affects the community character. It is my understanding that the FEIS will be the document that drives the future of this project. Oh, before I forget, on page 10 under traffic, weekday afternoons need to be done at 2:30 when buses leave from the schools in Ossining. We asked that last week, it still reads 4 o'clock. So if this FEIS is the driving document, if something is not included in it, we will not be able to address it at a later date. Because of that, we need to make sure that this is an ironclad document, not vague in any way. We cannot take a chance that Zapico can legally circumvent the steps necessary to ensure the proper treatment of, as Mitzi Elks, chair of the EAC, said last week, this unique property. And we're very concerned that that can happen. Also, Mitzi also asked that particular statement be put in the description. It's not there. This is a very unique property. It doesn't read that anywhere in the scope. At the March 25th, 2015 Planning Board meeting, David Gordon, our legal counsel for the concerned citizens of Ossining, stated that we have a high level of concern over this particular applicant. What we've seen is a pattern of a very aggressive approach, and at that meeting, seeing a minimalist approach to a hostile approach at the level of scrutiny that is necessary as a result of this application. At that meeting, one of Mr. Zappi's son interrupted a speaker and stormed out. At previous meetings, Mr. Zappi's litigation lawyer made attempts to intimidate members of our group. As I've said in the past, we respect the builder's right to build, but not at our expense. Although at the close of last week's planning board meeting, Mr. Weckstein asked the board not to micromanage what these studies will look like based on what some of the people who have spoken said someone else told them should be studied, we are asking you to consider all of our concerns now before it's too late to include them.
Thank you. Any other members of the public would like to speak?
Rich Semensky, 52 Edgewood Road, Ossining. The applicant made reference to page 5 and mitigation earlier. I'd like to focus on the sentence immediately preceding the one he pointed to. It states, mitigation measures will include a 1-to-1 ratio of disturbed wetland and wetland buffers to those replaced, and will be provided as feasible to address any adverse impacts to the habitat or species resources. So as feasible, I don't get it. It is in line with what Wendy was just commenting about Bill Janicki's comments regarding the vagueness of the wording. And are we to take this to mean that if mitigation, whether it's 1-to-1 or even 2-to-1, can't resolve a wetland issue, so it's not feasible? Let the problem remain. Or are you going to just not build where you can't build? That's not clear. So this whole document with that sense of vagueness, I don't know what to make of this. The other point is with respect to the 2 bedrooms, I see no references to square footage. Does anyone know what we're talking about? 2 bedrooms, that's it. I mean, they could be 1/10 the size of the neighboring houses. Why not just build an apartment building? So I really just don't know what to make of the document as well worded as it appears. A lot of work's gone into it, but I'm not an expert on how these proceedings operate. Hopefully you're going to bail this all out with some good judgments. Thank you.
I just want to comment on my comment, Ingrid, I don't need to get scolded again though. 2 bedrooms. What homes in Westchester County are 2-bedroom homes? I don't know any homes that are built that are 2 bedrooms.
May we just...
So I'm just commenting on the 2 bedroom.
Ma'am, please allow us to communicate our message on this concept, okay?
You got it.
I think we should start responding to some of those comments. Wendy made a number of comments regarding stormwater.
I mean, I think it really goes back to, the particulars aren't in there, but following both the New York State Stormwater Design Manual, which lays out the framework for designing permanent stormwater treatment practices, as well as the what's referred to as the Blue Book, which lays out the during construction practices and how you proceed with that. That's all pretty well laid out, and really both documents, that's where we're going to end up. Now when he prepares a SWIP, it's going to have to follow both of those guidelines, and because of the size of his project, he will also have to phase it to some degree to minimize the impacts. In terms of the road construction, at some point test holes will have to be done. In terms of his stormwater management practices, depending upon the type of practices proposed, percolation tests, deep holes will be required, but we won't be going off-site. That percolation off-site is not something that's relevant to the design of the stormwater practices. That's not something that's typically done, and it's really not relevant to the practices on site.
Wendy, were there other comments you made that have not been answered? Were there other comments you made that have not been answered yet?
Well, I understand that it's not customary perk test, but when you have a again, unique, this is probably the most unique property in the town of Austin, excuse me.
You don't have to make the
Okay.
case.
No, I'm just saying
Are there other
that I
things
think that, what I'm saying, I'm concerned that yes, road testing will be done. I'm concerned that if it's not in this document and it isn't done, we have no bearing.
Well, we're saying it's not going to be done. Off-site perk tests are not going to be done.
Well, as I said, I'm talking about the road testing, the deep hole testing.
Road testing to make sure your roads can tolerate the...
Yes.
There are going to be performance guarantees to make sure anything gets repaired. That's in here.
Mike, let me just tell you my concern. After the fact isn't what I want to hear. What I want to know is that protections are in place in the document, so it tells us they're going to be done, and then if they're not done properly, yeah, then they're going to pay for it. But I wanted to read that somewhere along the line when something isn't done and we go back to we didn't have to do that. It wasn't in the FEIS. My concerns are everything in this document that needs to be done so we don't get screwed. Sorry. That's all.
You can, since you've started, you might as well.
I don't think this document is going to satisfy everybody with everyone's, every single concern. We're doing things the way things are done. There's a standard practice, there's a standard operating procedure for this kind of thing, which does not involve testing all of the roads in advance. It would be wonderful to put anything we wanted into here, but we can't put anything we want in here. We have to follow sort of a standard operating procedure. There will be performance guarantees in place to make sure that any roadway that gets that gets disturbed, or what's the right word, that gets I think Wendy is talking about the roads on Tabano or Morningside Court, but the practice is not to test all those roads to see what they can tolerate. The practice is to get performance guarantees in place so that if a pothole is created or something like that, it gets repaired. I can't remember all the things. I wanted to try to respond to make it clear to the public that this document goes about as far as we can really go under the law, but I can't really remember all of the comments that have been made. The way things are characterized in this document is the way they're done. They're characterized in scoping outlines. If there's a word like if possible, if feasible, if practicable, that's entirely up to the planning board. It's within the planning board's purview. It's the planning board's judgment. It's not the applicant's judgment as to what's feasible and what's not feasible. With respect to the comment that Adam Eckstein made with regard to upland areas, we have wetlands. Everything else on the site is an upland area. We can't say that, I think he's right about this, we can't say that we will not have any lawn chemicals or pesticides going into any upland areas, because if we take away the wetlands and take away the upland areas, there is nothing left. It's either wetland or an upland area. So I think we have to take that part out. And I could respond to anything else, but I can't really recall all the rest of the comments.
I just wanted to add to something that David was just responding to Adam Weckstein's comment. I was going to suggest that my interpretation of the language concerning the addition of chemicals and so forth really, I think it meant to say that no chemicals could be added that would be able to find their way beyond into the wetland or into the wetland buffer area. And I think that the language, rather than be removed, could just be changed to clarify that, so that we can be assured that the runoff design will not allow any chemicals, any lawn chemicals and so forth that are applied legally to within a property boundary to migrate into the buffer zone or into the wetland. So I think the language could be tidied up a little bit to clarify that. It's an important point, so I'm glad you made it.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to speak?
I just want to speak to that one point. Are you contemplating the migration by means of wind and air? Are we only thinking about water flow? Because, as you know, many chemicals are applied, and as we've seen, there's sometimes very dry periods, and if chemicals are applied and they're not absorbed by moisture, they are able to migrate by wind. And that, in effect, does go upland, not just down to the wetlands. So I just wanted to address that. That's the point.
I would defer to Dan, I think. I'm not sure we can.
Can't hear.
I'm saying I'm not sure we can actually measure that in any meaningful way.
Yeah, hi, my name's Carlos Desmaras. I live at 78 Summerstown, just a little bit past Tavano Road. And I just had some questions about the language here, and I was hoping somebody could walk me through it. I'm on page 13 under existing conditions, and it talks about current service and service levels of municipal facilities and services. Obviously, water and sewer would come to mind, but also the schools come to mind. And I think anybody who lives in the town or the village or the village of Briarcliff knows that the school is sort of unique in all of Westchester and that it's been growing. And so we are very much at capacity, over capacity at the school. And so I was concerned about some of your comments, Mr. Stolman, where you talked about this is all sort of settled processes. I mean, you can get to a position where, yeah, well, let's just assume we can continue to add kids to the school, but at some point you actually have to add classrooms to the school. So it gets to a tipping point. If there is not enough capacity, enough rooms at the district, well, then you incur very significant capital expenditures. And so I would like to know, one, does the process capture that? And then two, is there a mitigation fee that would capture, let's say the school district has to put in $50, $60 million in additional school facilities because we hit the tipping point and we went over. And so how will that be shared among taxpayers? I would think that the people that put you over it will have to pay most of it, and if not all of it. So I wanted to understand that, because all it says here is it says will be discussed. I mean, that's not a very high threshold in my opinion, right? I mean, you said there's a very clear process. All these factors are going to be laid out clearly for us, or are they? And so that's one question. And then a little bit further down the page, you talk about fiscal impacts. And under fiscal impacts, you only talk about the town of Ossining. In terms of taxes, I could give a rat's ass about the town of Ossining taxes. I care about school district taxes. Right? Those are the big component of our tax bill. And so to leave the school district out of it, I mean, isn't that odd? And then the other question I have is, if the school district is the big dog, why aren't they here? And that's it. And I was hoping somebody here could answer it. Thank you.
So starting with the school district and the impact upon the school district, if you look at the top of page 14, it says governmental costs, including an analysis of service costs, including but not limited to the town of Ossining and the school district associated with providing services to the development will be identified, and then mitigation measures. So that has to be thoroughly analyzed, and the school district is specifically mentioned.
Right, but how is that done? I mean,
well, it's done in a there's a conventional way of doing this analysis, and it has to be thoroughly analyzed. We didn't lay it out step by step by step, but if it's not done in the conventional way of doing this demographic and economic analysis, we're going to make sure that we call that out.
But just for my sake, could you just walk me through what that conventional method would be in terms of determining capacity of the school district?
Well, the first thing that an applicant would normally do he would have his consultant contact the school district and get all of the enrollment data and get all the projections that the school district has. And then very often what will happen, with a school that's at capacity, if in fact it's at capacity, is if the business administrator at the school district or whoever is being talked to gives that information and gives information that leads one to believe, or an expert to believe, that there would have to be additional facilities constructed or additional teachers hired, then the cost of doing that would have to be analyzed, and there would be an analysis which would look at the revenue going to the school district versus what the cost would actually be.
But, I mean, one question, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but, I mean, we're talking about two-bedroom homes.
Please have him come to the
that
mic.
have-
so
might
that-
have-
They'd like to do
This is being taped, so I need you to come to the mic.
Yeah,
please.
sorry. Yeah, so we're talking about two-bedroom homes, but I understand that they have very significant square footage. And so how do you make a decision as to the likely number of children when you have very unconventional homes being put up? I mean, it doesn't, if you have a lot of square feet, rooms that can be subdivided, but it's only 2 bedrooms. How do you, I mean, again, are they trying to thread a needle here? I mean, why not just 3 or 4 bedroom homes? And that's all.
I guess the first question would be, is the proposal actually to build 2-bedroom homes?
Yes.
I'm not talking to the woman in the second row.
Has not been decided.
Yeah, it has not been decided. And as a matter of fact, the planning board can't require an applicant to build 3 or 4 bedroom homes. But if they're small 2-bedroom homes, the assessor is going to assign a certain appraisal value or assessment value to those homes.
So you don't know the size of the homes or the number of bedrooms in the home, but you're going to make an assessment about the impact on the school district in terms of the number of kids from those schools, from those homes that are going to go to the school district? How do you do that if you don't know the number of bedrooms?
I didn't say we don't know the number of bedrooms.
We just said we don't know.
I didn't say.
Well, they just did.
Can I be heard one moment? Can I just be heard one moment, please?
Sure, go up to the mic.
This time, I'm not against the public and I'm not against the board. There's a process. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. All that's being done right now is the creation of an outline of what we have to study. We will be coming back to the board when the study is done and to the public, and I guarantee you it will be thick, and I guarantee you it will include all the assumptions as to how many bedrooms are going in, what size the homes will be, what the alternatives will look like. We come back to this board, the board will then look at that and say, has this study met what we said had to be in it in the scope? If it doesn't, they'll send us back out, we have to redo it. When we come back in and they're finally satisfied it's decent, and they accept it, you as a public will come and have a hearing or multiple hearings, be able to make written comments on it. When we're done with that process, we will get those comments, the comments from the board, and we will have to put together a final environmental impact, which addresses all the concerns that you are talking about now. So what you're asking is for a level of detail, both from the board and from us, that's probably many, many, many months down the road, and probably 3 studies, three volumes of materials down the road. It's just not the way it works. You want the process done before it starts. And this isn't meant out of disrespect, but we could all be here all day speculating as to specific aspects of what's being studied. But it has to be a process. The board has to tell us what to study first. We have to go out and study it, and then we come back. It's not the other way around. The board doesn't make a conclusion as to what the study will show before we start, which is one of the reasons why I had to take exception to that sentence that we talked about earlier, putting aside the fact that we now understand what it was meant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
24 2-bedroom homes. This is the cluster plan. This is what we've looked at. This is what it reads. Just to let you know, 28 2-bedroom homes.
Thank you. Any other member would like to address the board?
Good evening. I'm David Gordon, and I'm the attorney for Concerned Citizens of Ossining. I just have a couple of points, and they'll be very specific to the document. First, on page 5, in paragraph 3 on mitigation, and this is the wetland section. It actually does what Mr. Wexstein objected to in a totally different context. it specifies a 1-to-1 ratio of mitigation. And I would advise that this is inappropriate. First of all, as Mr. Weckstein observed before, it may not be proper to conclude exact numbers at this point, but if you were to include, to use exact numbers, this is the wrong one to use. This is essentially not even the bare minimum. 1-to-1 mitigation means if you take out an acre of wetland, you try to recreate an acre. The problem is there's at least 3 decades of experience indicating that wetlands recreation is at best an inexact and unreliable science. And for that reason, most programs, they'd never specify 1-to-1. They might take 1-to-1 as a bare minimum, but they would always reserve the opportunity to require more than 1-to-1, depending on the likely success of the mitigation program. And so I would respectfully suggest that this has to be reworded. Even your town code has vaguer wording, but if you read into it, it appears to say they have to replace what's being taken out and with an eye toward the likely success rate. So I would advise, and I'm sure Mr. Stallman's aware of this, you need to go back and reconfigure that. I think DEC typically requires 2-to-1. I don't know what the numbers are, and it's probably variable, but specifying 1-to-1 is just, it's a bare minimum that simply would not be appropriate in this situation. So I'd advise you to take a good look at that. And I would suggest a level of wetlands replacement that actually has a strong likelihood of replacing the values that are lost. And you're going to get a lot more than 1-to-1 in terms of area at that point. I would also, I know some people have spoken about the use of the word as feasible, and I know Mr. Stallman said that that's going to be up to the board. I want to point out one particular instance where I think you really do, again, need to take a look at it. And that is on page 8, and it's in the habitat section for plants and animals. It says, again, in paragraph 3, mitigation will be provided as feasible for any significant adverse impact to vegetative habitats and wildlife resources. I would, you're talking here about essentially destroying habitat and trying to mitigate them. Here you have, and I'm going to discuss this in a few moments, a series of alternatives which goes from I forget how far down it goes, was it 10 lots up to 24, and I suppose the 28 that the applicant is requesting. There's a lot of flexibility as a result of your use of alternatives. And so the short answer is there is no reason to have a significant adverse impact on habitat. Mitigation should be the last resort here. Avoidance should be the absolute first opportunity, especially with the wide choices you have in terms of the number of lots, as well as conventional and cluster subdivision. You shouldn't be destroying, having significant impacts on habitats and then trying to mitigate them. And even if you did, it shouldn't be mitigation as feasible. I would suggest rewriting number 3 to mitigation as necessary to avoid any significant impacts to vegetative habitat. And then, obviously, if for some reason it was impossible, reasons that I can't even begin to foresee at the moment, then you would get to mitigation as feasible. So I really think you need to upgrade that particular point. I'd also like to address some language on page 10, but first I want to make a reference to language on page 9 by comparison, which I think will indicate my point fairly well. In paragraph E2, this is in the section on, I think it's archaeological and historic resources. You're requiring a study of any potential impact to the potentially historic neighborhood, and I think that's correct language. That's the language you kind of want. But I'm going to compare that to where it doesn't exist. And on page 10, paragraph 2A, this is in the land use, zoning, and community character section. I would suggest you need a statement that is just like the statement I read before. Any impact. This is really the critical impact in the document. So I really think you need to have an omnibus statement here. What these people are concerned about is impacts on their neighborhood of any type. And clearly there are physical impacts which need to be studied by the engineers, but we're also talking about significant potential for community character. What you have in paragraph 2A is a specification of you've already, I think you actually intended to do this, and you actually went a little bit far. You specified certain particular impacts. And the basic one is right in the first sentence. It's if the proposed use differs from the use of the adjacent properties. Clearly that's important, but you need to go back to that omnibus language. Any impact to community character, any impact to the enjoyment of the land needs to be studied. And I just don't want that to, I think you meant that, but I don't think it should slip through paragraph 2A. So I would go back to the previous page and just adapt that language, which I think you probably mean to use, because I think that's what everybody really cares about here. Just a very minor language correction, you probably already caught it, on page 14, paragraph K2D. You've got a reference to the new aqueduct. My guess is you meant to say the new Croton Aqueduct, at least in my draft. So, and finally, I want to I want to give you some kudos. I've been here speaking several times and have really tried to emphasize the need for alternatives on this project. Your alternative section is a very, very good attempt at specifying a wide range of alternatives and a significant look at them. Very often there's a look at alternatives and it doesn't really get into what the alternative would look like, what the impacts would be. You've clarified here that it has to be a full look at exactly what it would mean in terms of impacts. That's actually the language that's in SEQR, but very often it falls by the wayside. Obviously, I think it's good that it's in here. I want to compliment you for doing it, and I think you need to follow through on that. Now, Mr. Weckstein made a point before that he thought there were too many alternatives. For us, the range of alternative, and he also suggested that one reason why you might want to get away from the number was the burden on them, and that you can always interpolate if you needed to. We think that the number is fine. We think that the look that you're asking for is appropriate for this site. We urge you to keep it. However, if you were tempted to follow his suggestion, the most important thing here is to keep the range. The low end alternatives is what we were asking for. You could maybe, if you did lose one or two alternatives, don't take it off the low end. You can, if you want to do that interpolation, that's something that could save some work and perhaps get the same numbers. So I do want to compliment that section. We want to really urge you to take a look at those low end alternatives. That's exactly the sort of thing that's going to let you avoid impacts to habitat and a lot of the other impacts. And and also, as you do look at the alternatives, take a very hard look, almost as if the environmental impact statement was on those, to take a look at the comparative impacts. Very often they fall by the wayside in one paragraph, and that shouldn't happen here. So I do want to give you some kudos on that. I want to address a point that was raised earlier. There may have been some miscommunication between the lady that raised it and Mr. Ciarcia, so I want to go over it because I think it's really important. I believe the lady was asking you to ensure, or to at least have a very good hard look at what was going to happen to the amount of water in the streams, and whether, in particular, whether streams would end up being dewatered by the development, by the impervious surfaces, etc. And Mr. Ciarcia sort of directed everyone's attention toward the stormwater regulations and stormwater treatment. And I think there's a disconnect there. I mean, I'm not a scientist, but the basic science is currently, rain falls on the ground, some of it runs off as runoff, some of it seeps into the ground and becomes part of the groundwater in what's called base flow. And that basically keeps, not only does it limit floods when it seeps into the ground, but it also keeps your streams running during dry periods. The streams will dry up less when there is significant inflow into the recharge of the water supply. When you get a lot of runoff due to impervious surfaces, obviously you create some problems with flooding, you create some problems with pollution, but also you create problems with dewatering the streams because of the base flow. The DEC stormwater regulations don't address that problem. They do address the flooding issues. They do address the pollution issues from the added runoff, but they don't address the problem that streams go. And streams always go dry when you have development. This is exactly why. You're creating these impervious surfaces. You're taking out you're getting rid of your insurance policy. I believe it was Mr. Stallman who suggested that these would be detention basins, and he was really suggesting that they would have a significant amount of recharge. But still, those detention basins are at the bottom of your stormwater treatment system. So the recharge is going to come at the bottom. The problem of the streams at the top, when the water is diverted, is still not being fully addressed. And I think what the lady was suggesting is, as part of your scope, you make sure to address the health of those streams and make sure they're not going to get significantly dewatered. I just wanted to make sure that that was not slipping by. I thought I understood that that was a little bit of a disconnect. The amount of base flow in the streams is critical for the health of the stream. Those streams will go dry in the summer if you take the water out, and we've all seen it. We all know what that means. Just wanted to respond to just a couple of points that that Mr. Weckstein raised. There was an alternative that was raised that the applicant should look at access from Newcastle. He said that that's not required. Seeker is the state environmental review law. It requires you to look at potential environmental impacts and alternatives. It does not require an applicant to look at alternatives that are infeasible because the applicant doesn't own the property. But there's nothing in Seeker that says the impact stops at the town line. It doesn't work that way. If the applicant owns property, and even in another town, if it's adjacent, if it's feasible, if it's physically feasible, if it's a unified part of the project, there's no reason why you can't look at it. I don't think there's any law that says once you cross a town line, you're in some other environmental framework. That may be true of some of your town laws, you know, your wetlands laws, subdivision laws, etc., but not Seeker. Seeker's about the environment. I want to compliment the point that was made before on the pesticides. You know, the point again is to protect the resources. This isn't just about banning them on lawns, but it is about protecting the buffers, and it is about protecting the wetlands, so I think that that adjustment is appropriate. And I think that that's it. I do want to compliment the board for this particular draft. It's obviously much more extensive, and the look at alternatives is one that, if it's kept basically the way it is, would go very far toward the level of scrutiny and the level of flexibility that I think this needs.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to speak?
Just me. Howard Fleischer, 22 Tavano Road. I just have a couple of comments. First of all, thank you guys. You know, I think that we're getting close to the end of this hearing and this process, and we'll be going on to the next process. And I think that the documents as presented are a far greater improvement from what was originally submitted, first by the applicant, and then secondly by our consultant. And now, with everybody's collective input, we have something that is that has some meaning, some more meaning. Secondly, I just would like to address the fact that my parents always had a saying that you always err on the side of caution, and as it applies to the secret process here, I know that we, as David just pointed out, there's not a line of, you don't have to involve your researching things at the site itself, but attached to the site, the impact to the surrounding areas of the site, the community, and so on. And to that point, that's one point that I think going down to North State Road, where I personally have taken pictures of that road completely flooded over. And I have to go back to my archives to find them, but this happened not really just once, but several times that I've seen it, which is going to impact everybody on that road. So, and it flows all the way down. So to the extent that that can be allowed, I think that it's something, again, error on the side of caution, and make sure that we covered that as opposed to finding out after the fact that we should have. Secondly, I just want a clarification from David. Under the seeker timeframes, there's an outline that we have here as a footnote that the public comment must remain open until 10 days after the close of hearing. And this was footnoted at the period of the 60-day review. Is that correct?
That refers to the public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement?
Yes, that's the completion of the draft EIS and seeker hearings. There's a...
So once the planning board is satisfied that it has a draft environmental impact statement that is complete with respect to scope, content, and adequacy, it will file the DEIS along with, let me talk into the microphone.
Yep.
So once the planning board has a draft environmental impact statement that it deems complete with respect to scope, content, and adequacy, which may require a number of iterations, a number of submittals of proposed draft environmental impact statements and reviews by the planning board. The planning board will file the DEIS along with a notice of completion and will schedule a public hearing on the DEIS. And what you're reading from is regarding the public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement. Not this period right now.
Okay.
This is our scope,
This is our public scoping session. This is not the public
scoping
hearing.
document. Could you just point it out so that please?
Yeah. Completion of draft DEIS. We're back there. Sure.
Okay, and I just want to say that through these hearings over since November 2013, when I got involved, there have been a number of attorneys from the applicant, attorneys citing case law, Supreme Court law, and so on. And I'm sure maybe that's just to sort of point out some reference, but I'm sure that it's not. I would hope that it's not directed as a part of a insinuation that this will be challenged in court, your moves, and I don't think that any kind of shadow should be placed upon you all that should change your way of looking at things. And so I was just surprised by reference to that, and in the past, we as a audience and as the public have faced and been somewhat intimidated by these things, only to find out that it's against law to intimidate people during these hearings. So I just want to let you, spread your wings, make your decisions. Thank you.
Are there any other members of our public who would like to make a comment? Okay, thank you.
May I just respond briefly to what Mr. Gordon said, since he's asking you to include additional materials in the scope?
Okay, please.
Mr. Gordon mentioned a few things that he thought should be included in the scope. One relates to the mitigation and wildlife. He's suggesting that you put in a requirement that it be avoided, but that's rewriting SECRA. SECRA allows avoidance or mitigation, and there may be a hierarchy in that, and you're the ones who ultimately get to decide what the appropriate way to deal with the problem is. But I think to put it in a scope that mitigation is not an available option and that it must be avoided by the design of the subdivision is inconsistent with SECRA, and I think Mr. Gordon knows that. He knows this very well. Similarly, the idea that the language in the scope should be changed to say that any impact on the neighborhood has to be studied. That's not what SECRA is about. If you read it, it's about what the board identifies to be relevant impacts. To say any impact is just making a target that makes no sense at all. The way the scope is currently written, frankly, on that topic is the way it should stay. I would certainly oppose the changes that have been talked about relating to dewatering. Mr. Gordon is not an engineer, nor am I. Wouldn't pretend to be. Mr. Ciarcia is, has had input on the scope. Satisfied if when you have the studies you don't think you have enough information to make the judgment, it'll be dealt with at the DEIS phase of the process. And then finally, when we talk about the Newcastle access, we are not objecting to that only based on the fact that it's through Newcastle, through an already developed piece of property with 6 different buildings on it, but because with the exception of about a 2-acre piece here, it's owned by an entirely different entity than the one that's before your board. So Mr. Gordon is right. You don't have to build an access road through land you do not own. And I thank you.
Okay. At this time, we've heard the comments from the public and from the applicant. So I would like to find out if the board members, because this is the planning board's document, have any comments, because as you know tonight we will be approving this document so we can move forward in the process and move on to the next step. So do we have any board members who have comments that they would like to share? Oh. Yes. Okay.
If I may, I'd like to encourage the applicants when hiring consultants for the wildlife and vegetation studies in particular, to hire specialists with really unassailable credentials and reputations, and not be tempted to do the absolute minimum. And I think this would serve us all in the end, so that we don't have to, send you back and to do, follow-up work, which would just delay the process. So I just want to say that.
So we have a number of comments that were made tonight. The stormwater provision, we believe, will suffice as we analyze this project. And there will be rigorous analysis of all the water from the impervious surfaces on the site. So we are confident that the planning board will do an appropriate analysis of stormwater, etc. And the applicant, obviously working collaboratively with the planning board, will ensure that all requirements are met. There was a comment with regard to unique property. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I frankly think that we don't need to characterize the property in any particular way. I think if the experts do their job, and if the planning board's experts, and the planning board may hire a number of different experts to review what the applicant has done. If all the experts on the preparation side and the review side do their work, there isn't any particular need to characterize the property in any specific way.
David, who has to pay for those? People we hire. People you hire. We do. Yeah.
He's asking who has to pay for the review of all the
Oh, yeah, the applicant. The weekday afternoon.
The traffic experts say that these are the appropriate. The traffic experts, not the, I know this doesn't comply with what the general public is saying, but the traffic experts know which times of day are the peak hours that need to be analyzed, and we believe they're appropriate times.
Thank you. At this time, Dan, do you have any additional comments?
I wasn't going to say anything, but this bus schedule thing.
At this time, we're going to analyze the traffic surrounding the property and the development. This is an outlined scope. We have the ability to ask questions through the process. This is the first step. So we want to ensure the public that what this is an outline. There's going to be in-depth analysis of these items and other items through our conversation with the applicant. So, I mean, it's a very intense process, and it's very collaborative between the applicant and the planning board and our consultants and their consultant. There's a lot of work that goes into developing the DEIS and ultimately the FEIS. So at this point, we have to move forward with the document, and we believe it is a wonderful document, and we're very thankful to David Stolman. We're very thankful to our consultant, Dan and Wayne, our attorney, and our planning board members, the applicant for their comments, and of course the public for assisting with the thoughts. And we believe it's a document that represents how we're going to move forward in this process. Okay. At this point, we have vetted the document.
you could adopt a resolution to adopt this as your final scoping outline with the changes that we specifically made tonight.
I'm sorry, Edith. I want to just respond to the traffic thing.
Okay.
I'm reading from something from Newcastle, and it's used data compiled by the Institute of Transportation Engineers in their publication Trip Generation 9th edition to determine how much traffic the proposed development is expected to generate during the weekday AM and PM peak hours and school AM and PM peak hours. I think it's very important that that traffic read 2:30, buses are on the road from 6 schools. Thank you.
I'm not, it's not a peak hour.
Yes, sir.
Mark Hoflick, 98B Morningside Drive. First of all, I want to thank you all, David, for putting that document together. I think it's great. But I listen to words that our attorneys say, like the word new Crone Aqueduct. So if you leave that document and you vote yay or nay on that document, and you say Crone Aqueduct, what's going to happen? It's just little words here or there that everyone has mentioned earlier that I think, but what I think we're asking for is for you to go back once more, if it's legal, put our comments into it, and then next week vote on it. Thank you very much.
You could put the word Croton in, but whether we put it in or
Can't
not.
hear what he's saying.
We certainly could add the word Croton. Whether we add the word Croton or not, the applicant has to assess the impact on the new Croton Aqueduct.
I'm going to speak again, Mark Hoflick, Morningside Drive. There were other words that we, the public, asked for that we think, I think, you might have something that you have to deal with legally, but I think as the planning board, I think as the chairperson, you have the legal right. David and Wayne, I don't know whether or not we've asked for additional comments. We would like a few little words added in or taken out. What ramifications happen if you don't vote tonight?
Obviously, there is a time frame issue. There's some comments to wording with feasible, and I think that
You're going to determine what feasible means.
right. The planning board, the public has to have trust in the planning board too, right? That we are going to do the right thing. And I believe if, and we are working to do the right thing, to balance the rights of the applicant and the needs of the public. We have demonstrated that through a number of meetings. We will determine what's appropriate and feasible, and I believe that both parties will be happy with the ultimate outcome. So remember, the planning board has power and authority over the process, and we will exercise it as we move forward. Yes, ma'am.
What is the problem in a neighborhood where the bus stop, the bus stop on Barnes Road where I live is at the base of my driveway. So if I'm coming home at the wrong time, I sit behind the bus.
Right.
And the same, I bet that the people who live all the way at the end of Tavanna Road, I don't know, does the bus go all the way down Tavanna Road? No.
Ma'am, could you please
Okay.
address
So
the point.
I'm just asking, and my concern is knowing that the high school gets out at 2:26, and that's the first bus, that I think it's important, maybe in other communities, kids walk home, and this is, that's the regular people coming home from work from 4 to 6, but I think it's important to realize that in this area, and I live on the Barnes Road side, maybe I'm going to be impacted, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'll see more coyotes in my backyard. But that being said, I think it's important to focus on what this area has and do the right thing as far as the traffic study when the kids, because out in that area, in the village of Ossining, the kids walk. But in this immediate area, every single school is more than the 3 miles that, you know, the high school is 1.5 miles, all the other schools. So we're so far out. The bus schedule for the school district is crucial. And that's why the 2:30 to 4, by 4 o'clock, the elementary kids are home. But from 2:30 to 4, there is a lot of movement with a lot of different buses. So I would like you to consider that, not 4 to 6, but maybe 2:30 to 6.
I think that through the process, we'll have a good understanding of the buses and the traffic and the number. We're not sure of the changes, but I think 4 o'clock is when we have a lot of the traffic, people coming home from work, people doing things like that. Through the process, we will speak to the applicant and we'll move through it and, you know, talk to them about the issues with the bus, etc. It's a conversation. We don't want to tie ourselves only to the scoping document that if it's not in this, we can't even have the conversation. So not every little thing is going to be put in this specific document, okay?
It seems like a big thing.
Now, at this point, do any of our planning board members have any additional comments? May I have
I would like to
oh,
make one comment.
Go ahead.
I would just like to recommend that on page 5, David, number 3, mitigation, and the 5th line where it says measures will include a 1-to-1 ratio. Can you make that at least a 1-to-1 ratio?
Sure.
Thank you.
any additional comments?
Earlier, when we were talking about the phosphorus analysis, I was suggesting that nitrates and nitrites would probably automatically be included in a base panel. I think maybe we should actually just specify that they are included after all. I believe that they probably would automatically have been, but just to be sure, that's an important part of all water quality baseline work. So I'd like that stated if we could.
So it's nitrates, nitrites,
And ammonia.
Any other member? So at this time, may I have a motion to approve the scoping document as amended?
I make a motion.
May I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Now at this time, we are going to move to our minutes. March 25th, 2015. May I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second? All in favor? Okay, April 8th, 2015. May I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Transcript. Who read the transcript? No. May I have a motion to approve?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Yes.
May I have a second?
Actually, there was a typo I would like to bring up.
Okay. On page?
It's not of much relevance, but at one point David said that he would like to bolster something that I said, but it got interpreted as rebuff or something like that. I don't
That's what I
have
was
the exact
thinking.
wording. Yeah, no, he was.
Read my mind.
I don't think it's important because your follow-on comments made it clear what you meant, but.
You've noted it for the record.
Okay, yes.
Okay?
Exactly. Thank
He's
you.
noted it for the record. May I have a motion? I think it's, no? Okay. You motion. You second. All in favor? Okay, our next meeting is March 13th, 2015.
Is there anything on that agenda?
Oh, May.
Sandy, is there anything on that agenda?
March 13th, 2016.
Which is a week from tonight.
Yeah.
But there's nothing on the agenda.
There's nothing on our agenda for?
No,
No?
I didn't know if this was gonna be.
Right.
Okay, so our next meeting is May 27th, 2015. So we're all happy. So I'd like to adjourn our meeting tonight. And thank you all. Thank you to the public. Thank you to our consultants and our board members and Sandy for attending tonight. And have a wonderful night.